Have you ever felt defined by your past? Imagine this. You've finally escaped a toxic marriage, rebuilt your life, and found a love that sees you for who you truly are. You're at the most important charity gala of the year, surrounded by the city's elite. Suddenly, your ex-husband appears, a man who knows every single one of your old insecurities. In front of everyone, he launches a cruel, calculated attack designed to shatter your new reality and drag you back into the shadows of the woman you used to be. The room falls silent. All eyes are on you. But what he doesn't know is that the host of this entire event, the most powerful and respected man in the room, is your new billionaire husband. Stay with us for a story of humiliation, hidden strength, and the moment one woman reclaims her power. The dress was the color of a midnight sky, a deep, fathomless blue spun from silk and whispers. It felt less like fabric and more like liquid confidence against Amelia's skin. As she stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in their Fifth Avenue penthouse, she saw not just her reflection, but the woman she was supposed to be now, Mrs. Amelia Harrison, wife of Daniel Harrison, a man whose name was etched onto buildings and spoken with reverence in boardrooms across the globe. But tonight the silk felt heavy. "You're a million miles away," Daniel's voice, a low and comforting baritone, came from the doorway. He leaned against the frame of their dressing room, a vision in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He wasn't movie star handsome in a conventional way. His features were too sharp, his gaze too intense. But there was a profound stillness about him, a gravitational pull that made him the center of any room he entered. It was that stillness that had first drawn Amelia to him, a calm harbor after the hurricane of her previous life. She turned, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about the speech. Are you sure you don't want to be the one to give it? The Harrison Foundation Gala is your night." He crossed the room, his movements economical and precise. He stopped behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "The foundation supports emerging artists. You're the one with the masters in art history. You're the one who spends hours at downtown galleries finding talent no one else sees. You're the expert, Amelia. It should be you." His words were a balm, yet a familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. The expert. For 7 years she had been an accessory, not an expert. Her ex-husband, Richard Davenport, had loved to introduce her as "my artistic wife," a charming but ultimately frivolous title for the woman who organized his dinner parties and decorated their homes. Any attempt she made to pursue her own career, to co-author a paper or curate a small exhibit, was met with condescending amusement. "Isn't it cute that you have hobbies?" he'd say, a smile on his face that never reached his cold, assessing eyes. The divorce had been a quiet, brutal unraveling. Rick hadn't fought for her, he'd fought for the assets, meticulously dismantling their shared life as if it were a hostile takeover. He'd made her feel small, incompetent, and utterly replaceable. She'd walked away with a modest settlement and a crater where her self-worth used to be. Meeting Daniel a year later had been like learning to breathe again. He listened. He asked questions about her research on post-war expressionism and remembered the names of obscure painters she admired. He didn't see a pretty decoration. He saw a mind, a passion, a partner. He had carefully, patiently helped her rebuild herself. But the ghost of the woman she'd been, timid, anxious, desperate for approval, still lingered in reflections like this one. Tonight was the biggest event of the New York social calendar. A gala hosted by her and her husband. All of society would be there. Old friends, old contacts, old ghosts. "He might be there, you know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't need to say the name. Daniel's grip on her shoulders tightened ever so slightly. "Richard Davenport is a small man, Amelia. He has no power over you anymore." "I know. Intellectually, I know that." She smoothed down the silk of her dress. "It's just, he was a master at public humiliation disguised as a joke. He knew exactly where the cracks were and just how to press on them until they shattered. Then we'll show him there are no cracks left, Daniel said simply. He turned her around to face him, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. Tonight, you are not Rick Davenport's ex-wife. You are not Daniel Harrison's wife. You are Amelia Sterling, the brilliant co-chair of this foundation. You are giving a speech about a subject you love to a room of people who are there to support your vision. That is the only reality that matters. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, reassuring gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise, a promise of safety, of belief. As they descended in the private elevator, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation, Amelia took a deep breath. Daniel was right. She was no longer that woman. The silk on her skin began to feel less like a weight and more like armor. She had a voice now, and tonight she was going to use it. The car waited for them, a sleek black phantom ready to carry them into the heart of the city's glittering machine. She was ready, or at least she hoped she was. The Grand Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. An orchestra played softly from a balcony overlooking a sea of couture gowns and impeccably tailored tuxedos. Crystal glasses clinked, casting fractured rainbows against the marble floors. Towering floral arrangements of white orchids and delphiniums scented the air, mixing with the expensive perfumes of the city's most influential figures. It was a symphony of wealth and power, and for the first time, Amelia felt like she was a conductor, not just a member of the audience. Daniel was a master in this environment. He moved through the crowd with an understated grace, his hand resting in the small of Amelia's back. He introduced her not with a possessive flourish, but with a quiet pride that elevated her. "This is my wife, Amelia. She's the heart behind the Foundation's new acquisitions fund." People listened. They looked at her with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about her plans for the fund. The conversations were invigorating, a world away from the vapid gossip she had been expected to endure in her previous life. For the first hour, she felt herself unfurling, the tight bud of anxiety blossoming into confidence. She was witty, knowledgeable, and in her element. She saw the admiration in Daniel's eyes, and it fueled her. She was deep in a conversation with a prominent gallery owner about the burgeoning art scene in Lisbon when she felt it, a sudden prickling chill on the back of her neck. It was a sixth sense she had developed over years of living on high alert. The atmosphere around her had shifted, a subtle change in pressure, as if a predator had entered the ecosystem. And then she smelled it, a faint, familiar scent cutting through the orchids and champagne. Tom Ford's Oud Wood, Richard's signature cologne. Her blood ran cold. She slowly turned her head, her heart beginning a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. And there he was, standing not 20 feet away, schmoozing with a councilman she knew. He looked exactly the same. The sandy blonde hair perfectly coiffed, the easy, charming smile that was his most dangerous weapon, the suit that was just a little too flashy. He hadn't seen her yet. "Amelia, is everything all right?" the gallery owner asked, his brow furrowed with concern. She had stopped speaking mid-sentence. "Yes, forgive me," she managed, her voice feeling thin and distant. I just saw someone I wasn't expecting." Daniel, who had been speaking with a senator nearby, must have sensed the change in her. He materialized at her side instantly, his presence a solid wall. "Darling, Councilman Roberts was just asking about you." His tone was light, but his eyes, when they met hers, were sharp and questioning. He followed her gaze, and his expression hardened, almost imperceptibly. At that exact moment, Richard turned, his eyes scanning the room as if he were surveying his kingdom. They swept past her once, then snapped back, widening in recognition. The charming smile faltered for a fraction of a second before being plastered back on, broader and more predatory than before. He excused himself from the councilman and began to walk toward them. Every step he took felt like a drumbeat counting down to her doom. The confidence she had so carefully curated all evening began to evaporate, leaving behind the raw, familiar dread. This was his hunting ground, a crowded room where social conventions prevented you from screaming or running away, a place where he could strike with words, leaving wounds no one else could see. "Well, well, Amelia, I almost didn't recognize you," Richard said, his voice a smooth, practiced melody that had always set her teeth on edge. He stopped in front of them, his gaze flitting dismissively over Daniel before settling on her. "You look, well, very blue." He gestured vaguely at her dress. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment, a judgment. "Richard," she said, her voice commendably steady, "I wasn't aware you were a patron of the arts." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh, I dabble. It's important to be seen at these things. You know that." His eyes flickered to Daniel again. "And you must be the man of the hour, Richard Davenport." He stuck out his hand, the embodiment of superficial charm. Daniel took his hand, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. "Daniel Harrison." Recognition dawned in Richard's eyes, followed by a flicker of something else, envy, perhaps, or disbelief. He had obviously heard of her remarriage, but facing the reality of Daniel Harrison in the flesh was clearly another matter. Rick's world was built on a hierarchy of wealth and influence, and he had just come face to face with a man who occupied a stratosphere far above his own. For a moment, Amelia thought that might be enough to chasten him. She was wrong. The realization of Daniel's status didn't deter Richard. It provoked him. It was a challenge. He saw her not as a woman who had moved on, but as a prize that had been stolen from him, and now he needed to prove that the prize was, and always had been, flawed. "Harrison." "Of course," Richard said, recovering quickly. "I've read about your work. Impressive. It takes a certain kind of man to build an empire like that." He then turned his full attention back to Amelia, a patronizing smile gracing his lips. "And it takes a certain kind of woman to land one. My Amelia always was ambitious. She just lacked the follow-through. It's wonderful to see she finally found someone to handle all the tedious details for her." The attack was subtle, a poisoned dart aimed directly at her deepest insecurity, the fear that she was nothing without a powerful man beside her. Daniel's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through her own, a silent message of support. But the damage was done. The ghost of her past was no longer a whisper. It was standing right in front of her, wearing a smug smile and smelling of oud wood. The conversation, if it could be called that, was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Richard as its virtuoso. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say anything overtly slanderous. He simply wielded their shared history like a scalpel, making a series of small, precise incisions into Amelia's carefully constructed composure. He brought up old inside jokes that were never funny, designed to exclude Daniel and paint a picture of an intimacy that had long since soured. He referenced vacations and events, twisting the memories into something that highlighted her perceived weaknesses. "Remember that trip to Aspen, darling," he said to Amelia, though his words were clearly for the small group of onlookers that had begun to form, drawn by the magnetic pull of confrontation. Amelia tried to take up skiing. She spent 2 days on the bunny slope and then decided her talents were better suited to supervising the hot chocolate. A real trooper. He laughed, inviting the others to join in. A few offered weak, uncomfortable smiles. Amelia remembered that trip. She'd had a terrible flu she was trying to hide, and Rick had insisted she join his friends on the mountain, accusing her of being antisocial when she'd tried to beg off. The memory was a bitter pill. Daniel's face remained a stony mask. His grip on her hand, the only sign of the fury she knew, was simmering beneath the surface. He was letting her lead, letting her decide how to handle this. But she felt her voice trapped in her throat, strangled by years of conditioned silence. To argue would be to seem defensive. To ignore him would be to concede. Rick, sensing his advantage, pressed on. He was enjoying this, the way a cat enjoys toying with a cornered mouse. He turned to a well-known investor standing nearby. You know, Amelia once had a brilliant idea for a little business, an online art consultancy for young collectors. I thought it was adorable. Poured a little seed money into it for her, just for fun." He sighed dramatically. "But bless her heart, the numbers, the logistics, it was all a bit much. It's hard work, building something from scratch. It requires a certain grit." This was his masterstroke, the deepest, most painful cut. It wasn't a little business idea. It had been her dream. She had spent a year developing the business plan, building a website and making contacts. The seed money he mentioned had come with so many strings and so much oversight that he had effectively suffocated the venture before it could even breathe. He had second-guessed every decision, belittled her strategies in front of their friends, and finally pulled the funding with a dismissive, "I think we've had enough of this little experiment, don't you?" He had framed its failure as her personal failing, a testament to her lack of business acumen, and she, broken and exhausted, had believed him. To hear him retell that story now in this public forum as a quaint anecdote of her charming incompetence was devastating. It was a public rewriting of her history, erasing her effort and ambition, and leaving only a caricature of a spoiled wife playing at business. The air grew thick with unspoken pity. She could feel the eyes on her, the sympathetic tilts of the head, the gentle, condescending smiles. They weren't seeing Amelia Sterling, the capable art historian. They were seeing Rick's version, the flighty, ambitious woman who couldn't quite make it on her own and had to find a richer, more powerful man to finish the job. Her breath hitched. The grand hall, with its soaring ceilings and beautiful music, suddenly felt claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in. The silk of her dress was no longer armor. It was a shroud. She felt a familiar, hot sting behind her eyes, and she prayed with every fiber of her being that she wouldn't cry. That was what he wanted. A public display of emotion would be his ultimate victory. She risked a glance at Daniel. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle jumped in his cheek. His eyes were no longer unreadable. They were filled with a cold, terrifying rage, but it was controlled. He was a patient hunter, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He met her gaze and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, a silent command. Don't let him win. It was then that Richard, drunk on his own cruelty and the rapt attention of his audience, made his fatal mistake. He overplayed his hand. "But hey, all's well that ends well," he said, clapping Daniel on the shoulder with a familiarity that was grossly inappropriate. She landed on her feet and then some. "You must be very proud, Harrison. She's the ultimate acquisition. Beautiful, knows how to throw a party. Just don't let her near the checkbook. It's not her strong suit." The words hung in the air, ugly and venomous. He hadn't just insulted her intelligence. He had reduced her to a possession, a beautiful, expensive object Daniel had acquired. He had called her a gold digger in the most polite, public and damaging way possible. The orchestra seemed to falter. The bubble of conversation around them popped, leaving a pocket of thick, horrified silence. This was no longer subtext. This was a public execution, and Amelia was the one on the scaffold. In the immediate aftermath of Richard's final venomous remark, the world seemed to slow down. The ambient noise of the gala, the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, faded into a dull, distant roar, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a seashell. All Amelia could focus on was the ring of faces around her, their expressions a mixture of shock, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled pity. It was the look she dreaded most, the one that confirmed she was a subject of gossip, a tragic figure in a drama not of her own making. She felt the old panic rising, a cold tide threatening to pull her under. Her instinct, honed over 7 years of marriage to Rick, was to shrink, to apologize, to smooth things over and absorb the humiliation as if it were her due. She could feel the phantom weight of his hand on her arm, the subtle pressure he would use to signal her compliance. But his hand wasn't there. Daniel's was. His grip on her fingers was a grounding force, an anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. She looked from the pitying faces of the crowd to the smug, expectant smirk on Richard's face. And finally, she looked at Daniel. The rage was still there in his eyes, a banked fire, but it was overshadowed by something else, an unwavering, absolute belief in her. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He wasn't looking at her as a victim he needed to rescue. He was looking at her as his equal, his partner, waiting for her cue. In that moment, he wasn't deciding how to save her. He was giving her the space to save herself. And in that space, something shifted within Amelia. A different kind of fire began to burn away the cold dread. It was a slow, quiet burn of indignation. Not just for herself, but for the woman she was now, the woman Daniel saw. She had spent years allowing Richard to define her narrative. She had let him write the story of her failures, her inadequacies, her cute little hobbies. She had let him convince her that his voice was the only one that mattered. No more. She gently squeezed Daniel's hand, a signal. Then she let go, standing on her own. She took a single, deliberate step forward, closing the small gap between herself and Richard. The movement was small, but it was an act of claiming her ground. She met his gaze directly. He was still smiling, anticipating tears or a flustered retreat. He wasn't prepared for the stillness he saw in her eyes. "It's interesting, Richard," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying with perfect clarity in the silent pocket around them. It didn't tremble. "You talk about my business venture as if you were a benevolent patron watching a child play with blocks." Richard's smile tightened. "Now, Amelia, don't be dramatic." "I'm not," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm being precise. You call it seed money. I call it a leash. You didn't invest in my business. You bought a controlling interest in my dream so you could strangle it. A real investor, a real partner, offers support and guidance. You offered criticism and control. The business didn't fail because of my lack of grit. It failed because you engineered its failure, because the thought of me succeeding at something that was entirely my own was more threatening to you than any financial loss." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. This was not the response anyone had expected. Richard's face, for the first time, lost its smugness. A flicker of genuine shock replaced it. Amelia wasn't finished. She took another breath. "And as for my supposed inability to handle a checkbook," she said, her gaze sweeping over the onlookers before landing back on him, "you're right, in a way. I was never very good at managing the allowance you gave me. But the acquisitions fund for this foundation, which I have been managing for the past 6 months, has already seen a 7% return on its investments. We have acquired 3 major works from undervalued artists, one of whom just had her first solo show at the Whitney." She let that hang in the air. She saw the investor Rick had been talking to raise his eyebrows in genuine surprise. "You see, Rick," she said, and for the first time she used the diminutive name he hated, the one his father used to use when he was disappointed in him. "The difference between you and Daniel is not the size of your bank accounts. It's that you saw me as a liability to be managed, and he sees me as an asset to be valued. You handed me crayons and called me an artist. He handed me a foundation and trusted me to build a legacy." She paused, then delivered the final, quiet blow. "So thank you for your concern, but my portfolio and my life are in excellent hands. My own." Silence. A profound, ringing silence. Richard stood there, his mouth slightly agape, the color drained from his face. He had been so expertly, so thoroughly dismantled, not with emotion, but with cold, hard facts. She hadn't yelled or cried. She had simply corrected the record, calmly and publicly. Amelia turned her back on him, a gesture of finality. She found Daniel's hand again. He enfolded it in both of his eyes shining with a pride so intense it almost took her breath away. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, his voice for her alone. That was the real speech of the night. He then straightened up, his public mask of calm authority slipping back into place. He scanned the stunned faces around them, and then, without so much as a glance at the shell-shocked man his wife had just annihilated, he raised his voice slightly to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please make your way to your seats. Dinner is about to be served, and we have a very special announcement to make." The spell was broken. The crowd, buzzing with the drama they had just witnessed, began to disperse. The eye of the hurricane had passed, and Amelia, for the first time in her life, felt the deep, unshakable calm of the survivor who had not just weathered the storm, but had learned to command the winds. Walking toward the ballroom felt like moving through water. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the aftermath of the confrontation. Whispers followed them like the rustle of silk, every glance holding a new weight of respect and curiosity. Amelia held her head high, her hand resting on Daniel's arm. She felt strangely serene, as if a fever she'd been carrying for years had finally broken. They took their seats at the head table on a raised dais overlooking the hundreds of guests. The room was a masterpiece of understated elegance. Tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces of glowing candles and cascading orchids, and the vast iconic windows of the museum framing the glittering tapestry of Central Park at night. On the lectern at the center of the stage, her speech was waiting. A few moments ago, the thought of delivering it had filled her with dread. Now it felt like a formality. She had already said everything that truly needed to be said. As the first course was served, Daniel leaned over to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. She met his gaze and gave him a genuine smile, the first truly relaxed one of the evening. "I'm better than okay, Daniel. I feel light." He nodded, understanding completely. "He won't bother you again." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Social predators like Richard fed on perceived weakness. Tonight, Amelia had shown him and everyone else that she was made of steel. He had lost his power. After the main course was cleared, a hush fell over the room as Daniel approached the lectern. A warm spotlight illuminated him, separating him from the sea of expectant faces. He was a natural public speaker, exuding an aura of calm authority that commanded attention without demanding it. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice resonating through the hall. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Your generosity is the lifeblood of this foundation, allowing us to continue our mission, to champion the voices that might otherwise go unheard, to invest in the visionaries who will shape our culture for generations to come." He spoke for a few minutes about the foundation's recent successes, his words eloquent and sincere. Amelia watched him, her heart swelling with a love so profound it almost ached. This was the man who had seen her, truly seen her, when she could barely see herself. "But tonight," Daniel continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I want to talk about the future, about a new direction. For too long, the art world has been governed by a small group of established players. It can feel impenetrable, a closed circle. We believe it's time to open the doors, to create a new point of entry for raw, undiscovered talent." He paused, letting the anticipation build. "Tonight, I am thrilled to announce the creation of the Sterling Grant," he said, his eyes finding Amelia's across the dais. Her breath caught in her throat. Sterling. He had used her maiden name. "This will not be a small, one-time prize," he went on, his voice ringing with passion. "The Sterling Grant will be one of the most significant fellowships for emerging artists in the country. It will provide a substantial 5-year stipend, studio space, and a guaranteed solo exhibition at a major New York gallery for one artist each year. It is an investment not just in a piece of art, but in a career, in a life." A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the room. This was a monumental announcement, a game-changer in the philanthropic world. "This initiative," Daniel said, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power, "was the vision of one person. Someone whose passion is matched only by her expertise, and whose belief in the transformative power of art is the guiding principle of this foundation. He turned, extending his hand not toward the audience, but toward her. The committee for this new grant required a chairperson with a unique combination of academic rigor and a true street-level understanding of the contemporary art scene, someone with the courage to take risks on new talent and the integrity to lead this multi-million-dollar initiative. There was only one choice. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating the inaugural chair of the Sterling Grant Selection Committee, my wife, Amelia Sterling. The room erupted in thunderous applause. For a moment, Amelia was frozen in her seat, stunned. This was what he had meant by a special announcement. This wasn't just a title or a vanity project. It was a position of immense responsibility and influence. He wasn't just defending her honor. He was broadcasting her competence to the entire world, cementing the very authority Richard had tried to strip from her. He had taken Richard's narrative, that of the incompetent wife playing with her hobbies, and set it on fire. Daniel was still standing there, his hand outstretched, a proud and loving smile on his face. Shaking slightly, Amelia rose and walked to the lectern, the applause swelling around her. She stood beside him, and he discreetly slid her prepared speech to the side, giving her a small nod of encouragement. He knew she didn't need it anymore. She looked out at the hundreds of faces, all turned toward her, waiting. She saw them now not as judges, but as allies. She found the table where she had last seen Richard. He was gone. His seat was empty. He couldn't bear to witness this. He couldn't stay for her coronation. Amelia leaned into the microphone, the quiet confidence she had found earlier, now a solid, unwavering core within her. "Thank you, Daniel," she began, her voice clear and strong, "and thank you all. I am deeply honored to accept this position. For too long I have been a quiet admirer of art. Now I have been given the opportunity to be its advocate, and I promise you all, I will not be quiet any longer." The applause that followed was even louder than before. It was the sound of her future beginning. Richard Davenport didn't just leave the gala. He fled. He slipped out a side exit like a common thief, the thunderous applause for Amelia chasing him out into the cold New York night. He half expected the doorman to sneer at him, the valets to whisper as he claimed his car. Every shadow seemed to hold a mocking face. He drove his silver Porsche too fast through the city streets, the engine's roar a poor substitute for the power he had felt just an hour earlier. He had walked into that gala feeling like a king, ready to put his upstart ex-wife back in her place, to remind her of the natural order of things. He was Richard Davenport. She was the woman he had discarded. But the memory of her standing there, her voice calm and cutting, her eyes clear of the fear he had worked so hard to instill, played on a loop in his mind. "You handed me crayons and called me an artist. He handed me a foundation and trusted me to build a legacy." The words were like acid, dissolving the carefully constructed edifice of his superiority. She hadn't just defended herself. She had dissected him. She had exposed him for what he was, a petty, insecure bully whose only strength lay in tearing others down. And she had done it in front of everyone. The investors, the councilmen, the old money families whose approval he so desperately craved. He had tried to make her small, and in doing so had revealed his own insignificance. He got back to his sterile, oversized apartment in Tribeca and poured himself a large glass of Macallan 25. He stood by the window, looking out at the city that now felt hostile and alien. His phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the men who had been in the circle during the confrontation. "Tough night, Rick. Might be best to lay low for a bit." It wasn't a message of sympathy. It was a warning, a disavowal. He was already becoming a social pariah. The next few days were a slow, agonizing bleed. The story of the confrontation at the Harrison Gala spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. But the narrative wasn't what he had intended. He wasn't the charming ex-husband putting a gold digger in her place. He was the villain. He was the bitter ex, the man who had publicly attacked the brilliant and beloved Amelia Sterling. The New York Post's gossip column ran a thinly veiled item about a hot-headed finance bro whose Gala gaffe had made him the town's top laughingstock. The consequences were not just social. On Tuesday, a major investor in his boutique private equity firm called for an emergency meeting. The man, a conservative patriarch in his 70s, had been at the gala with his wife, who was a great admirer of the arts, and now, apparently, of Amelia Sterling. "Richard," the investor said, his voice gravelly and devoid of its usual warmth. "What I witnessed the other night was not just poor form. It was a demonstration of catastrophic judgment. It was reckless. It was volatile. How can I trust you with my family's money when you behave with such a profound lack of control and foresight?" Richard tried to defend himself, to frame it as a private matter, a lover's quarrel. The old man wasn't having it. "There is no private matter when you conduct yourself like that in public, my boy. Character is character. You showed us yours." The investor pulled his money. It was a massive blow, and it triggered a crisis of confidence among the firm's other clients. Like rats deserting a sinking ship, they began to pull out one by one. The empire Rick had built, an empire predicated on an image of slick, untouchable success, began to crumble. It turned out that image was the only thing holding it up. Meanwhile, Amelia stepped into her new role with a grace and determination that surprised everyone but Daniel. She didn't gloat about her victory. She simply got to work. Her face appeared in Art Forum and the New York Times art section, not as a socialite, but as the formidable new chair of the Sterling Grant. She was quoted discussing her vision for fostering artists who engaged with social and political issues. She was photographed not in ball gowns, but in paint-splattered studios, speaking with young, intense artists, her expression one of deep, intelligent engagement. She and Richard had one final, unexpected encounter about a month after the gala. She was leaving a coffee shop in Chelsea after meeting with a potential grant candidate when she saw him walking towards her. He looked diminished. The bespoke suit seemed to hang off him. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hurried, furtive energy. He saw her and froze. For a moment she felt a flicker of the old fear, a conditioned reflex. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He looked at her, his eyes holding a desperate, pleading expression. "Amelia," he said, his voice raspy. I'm sorry." She studied him. It wasn't the apology of a man who understood the pain he had caused. It was the apology of a man who was sorry he'd been caught, sorry he had lost. "Are you, Rick?" she asked, her tone neutral. "Are you sorry for what you did, or are you just sorry for how it turned out for you?" He had no answer. He just stared at her, the full weight of his ruin visible in his face. Amelia felt a surge of something she didn't expect. It wasn't hatred or satisfaction or even triumph. It was pity, a deep, profound pity for this small, hollow man who could only feel big by making others feel small. He was a ghost, haunted by his own inadequacies. "Goodbye, Richard," she said, and there was no malice in it, only a quiet finality. She walked away without looking back, leaving him standing on the sidewalk. She wasn't escaping him anymore. She was simply leaving him behind, a relic of a past that no longer had any claim on her. She had a meeting to get to, a legacy to build. And for the first time, the path ahead was completely, dazzlingly clear. The penthouse, which had once felt like a beautiful stage for a life Amelia was still learning to perform, now simply felt like home. The weeks following the gala were not filled with triumphant celebration, but with a quiet, deepening intimacy between her and Daniel. The dramatic public events had forged something new between them, transforming their love from a safe harbor into a shared fortress, built on a foundation of absolute trust. One rainy Saturday afternoon, they were curled up together in the library, a room panelled in dark, soothing mahogany and filled with the comforting scent of old books and leather. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the floor-to-ceiling shelves. Amelia was reading a proposal from a young sculptor in Brooklyn, while Daniel was going through financial reports, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a long while, The only sounds were the crackling fire and the gentle rustle of paper. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who have nothing to prove to one another. Finally, Amelia set the proposal down. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly. Daniel looked up from his papers, his intense gaze softening as it met hers. "For what?" "For what you did at the gala, for the grant, for everything." He closed the folder he was holding and gave her his full attention. "Amelia, I didn't do anything. I just provided a platform. You were the one who climbed up on it and delivered the speech of a lifetime twice." "But you could have," she insisted. "You could have stepped in. You could have destroyed him. You could have been the knight in shining armor. It's what everyone expected." "And what would that have accomplished?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. "It would have proven that Daniel Harrison is a powerful man who protects his wife. Everyone already knows that. It would have made you a footnote in your own story. I was not interested in that." He shifted on the leather sofa, turning to face her more directly. "When I saw him talking to you, when I saw that look on your face, every primitive instinct in my body wanted to tear him apart. It took everything I had not to. But I trust you, Amelia. I trust your strength, your intelligence, your heart. My job isn't to fight your battles for you. My job is to make sure you have the right armor and that you know the battlefield is level. The victory had to be yours. It was the only way to truly silence him." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of profound gratitude. In her first marriage, her strength had been seen as a threat. With Daniel, it was her most cherished attribute. He didn't want to possess her. He wanted to empower her. "The sterling grant," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Using my name, it was the only name that made sense," he said simply. "It's your legacy, your vision. Harrison is the name on the buildings, the name of the corporation. But Sterling, that's the name of the woman I fell in love with. The brilliant, passionate woman who deserved to have her name on something that will outlast both of us." She finally understood the depth of his character. His power wasn't in his wealth or his influence. It was in his perception, his emotional intelligence. He had understood that her redemption couldn't be given to her. It had to be earned. He hadn't just saved her from a moment of humiliation. He had given her the tools to free herself from a lifetime of doubt. She moved across the sofa and curled into his side, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They sat like that for a long time, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "I saw him," she said quietly after a while. "Richard, a few weeks ago." She felt his arm tense slightly. "And?" "He apologized." She paused. "But he wasn't sorry. Not really. He was just broken. I felt sorry for him." Daniel was silent for a moment. "Then you are truly free of him," he said at last. "Hate is a chain. Pity is just a final look back before you close the door." He was right. The door was closed, locked. The ghost was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable certainty. She was not the woman Richard had tried to make her, nor was she defined solely by the love of the good man beside her. She was the architect of her own life, and she was just beginning to build. The fire crackled, the rain tapped against the window pane, and inside their quiet fortress, Amelia Harrison, born Amelia Sterling, felt perfectly, profoundly at peace. 6 months later, the first annual Sterling Grant Award ceremony was held not in a grand, impersonal museum hall, but in a vibrant, sprawling gallery space in the heart of Chelsea. The cavernous room was filled with the raw, challenging work of the 5 finalists. There were massive, unsettling sculptures forged from reclaimed steel, intricate digital canvases that pulsed with light and data, and haunting photographic portraits that captured the soul of the city's forgotten corners. The air buzzed not with the polite murmur of high society, but with the excited, passionate chatter of artists, critics, and true collectors. Amelia moved through the crowd, not as a host, but as a central part of the creative energy. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry, the quiet confidence she now carried as a second skin. She greeted artists by their first names, discussing their techniques with an easy, expert familiarity. She introduced young, nervous painters to influential critics, her endorsements carrying real weight. She had become a power broker in this world, not through wealth, but through respect. Daniel was there, of course, but he remained in the background, watching her with a quiet, ever-present pride. He was not the center of this universe. She was. He was the patron, but she was the curator. The evening culminated in the announcement of the winner. Amelia took the small stage, the crowd falling into a rapt silence. She looked out at the faces, young, old, hopeful, established, and felt a deep sense of purpose. "When we envisioned the Sterling Grant," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "we didn't just want to find a great artist. We wanted to find a necessary voice, someone whose work doesn't just decorate a wall, but demands a conversation. Someone who shows us the world, or ourselves, in a way we have never seen before." She spoke about each of the 5 finalists, highlighting the unique power of their work with such insight and eloquence that each of them felt like a winner. Then she opened the envelope. The recipient of the inaugural Sterling Grant is a photographer whose work is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She turns her lens on the communities we too often ignore and finds not despair but a fierce, defiant beauty. It is my incredible honor to award the grant to Maria Flores. A young woman with fiery eyes and ink-stained fingers gasped from the crowd. Tears streamed down her face as she made her way to the stage, engulfed in hugs from her fellow artists. As Amelia presented her with the award, a check that would change her life and a symbol of a future she had only dreamed of, she saw her own journey reflected in the young artist's eyes. The journey from doubt to validation, from being silenced to finding a powerful voice. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Amelia stood with Daniel by one of the gallery's large windows, looking out at the city streets. "Look at what you've done, Amelia," Daniel said, his voice filled with awe. "You've started a movement." "We started a movement," she corrected him, lacing her fingers through his. "No," he said firmly. "This was all you. I just signed the checks." He smiled. "It's the best investment I've ever made." A news alert buzzed on his phone. He glanced at it and his expression changed. "What is it?" she asked. "It seems Davenport's firm officially filed for bankruptcy today," he said, showing her the screen. "The last of his partners pulled out. It's over." Amelia read the headline. "Davenport Equity Group collapses amid founder's reputational crisis." She felt a flicker of something, not joy, not sadness, not even pity anymore. It was just closure, an echo from a distant life. Richard's downfall was not a dramatic act of God or a targeted revenge plot. It was a simple, inevitable implosion, the natural consequence of a structure built on a hollow foundation. He had built his life on an image, and when one woman had found the courage to expose that image as a fraud, the entire edifice had come crashing down. She handed the phone back to Daniel, her mind already moving on. Maria Flores was talking about using the grant money to document the stories of immigrant families along the southern border. Another finalist was already discussing a collaboration with a poet he'd met tonight. The gallery was alive with possibility, with futures being forged, with new stories waiting to be told. Her story with Richard was over. It was a book she had finished reading and placed back on the highest, dustiest shelf of her library. Her new story, the one she was writing every day, was infinitely more interesting. She turned away from the window and back toward the vibrant, noisy, beautiful room, her world. "Come on," she said, pulling Daniel's hand. "I want to introduce you to a sculptor I think we should be watching. Her work is extraordinary." And as she led him into the heart of the future she was building, Amelia Sterling was no longer anyone's acquisition or anyone's ex-wife. She was the curator of a life, and its collection was just beginning to take shape. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that our past does not have the right to write our future. True strength isn't about dodging the blows of life, but about standing up after you've been knocked down, finding your voice, and calmly speaking your truth, even when it trembles. It shows that the most powerful revenge is not loud or dramatic, but is found in the quiet, determined act of building a life so full and meaningful that the ghosts of yesterday simply have no place to live. If this story of resilience resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss another journey with us. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Thank you for watching.